Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. On Tuesday, it will be 100 years since women gained the vote, albeit to begin with, it was women over the age of 30. And to mark the occasion, the Prime Minister is going to give a big speech. As part of that speech, she's going to unveil new plans to create an offence of intimidation in public life. And that'll be for people who disrupt or stop public meetings using intimidation and or violence. This, of course, follows something that took place last Friday night. Jacob Rees-Mogg was down in Bristol at the West of England University, and here's what happened. Well, that was a little sound clip of Jacob going to address a group of students, at which 8 people, with their faces covered, break in. He gets pushed, a couple of punches get thrown, and it was all pretty unpleasant. Yesterday morning, Jacob spoke to Andrew Castle on LBC the morning after the incident, and this is what he had to say.
I think it's a pity that they weren't interested in discussing their views and the areas where they disagreed with me, but I don't think one should try and stop a peaceful protest. It's not a very intellectual level of debate, and I've never thought that resorting to mere abuse is a good way of putting a political argument across. And I think if you're in public life, you must expect that some people will be rude to you. I wouldn't worry about that. I just think it's a pity they didn't want to have a debate. I'd have been more than happy to discuss whatever issues it was that they were concerned about. And indeed, I went over to try to talk to them, but they were most unwilling to engage.
Jacob, I'm an old hand at this. I've got years on you. They don't want to engage in debate. They actually want to close down debate. That is the whole object of what these people do. My life changed fundamentally one day in Scotland 4 or 5 years ago, when there I was in the street, and suddenly about 80 supporters of Scottish separation who were chanting anti-English abuse on a level that I think elsewhere would be described as racist. They were threatening, they were intimidatory. A taxi was called to get me out of there, and they told the taxi driver, if you take this man, we'll find out where you live. And literally, the taxi driver he was frozen with fear. I've never seen anything like it. And the Edinburgh police then turned up, did their bit, and yes, they locked me in a pub for my own safety, which, much to the amusement of the locals, who thought it was the best thing that had happened in that boozer for some years. But I realised after that my level of I suppose, notoriety, because, I did support some very extreme political views. I believed in running our own country and controlling our borders. This, by some, is seen as very extreme. And from that moment on, I had to have security, and in fact, as the European elections of 2014, the general election of 2015, the referendum, all took place over the next 3 years, I frankly couldn't go to any public event in the country without not just a security man, but a team of people, because the threat of violence was there against me every single day. I think what happened was probably a bit of a shock for Jacob. He was asked, of course, why he turned up without security and what he thought for the future on that. Here's what he said.
I think this country is broadly very safe, and that actually protesters of that kind are going to shout people down, but they're not physically dangerous. The tragedy of the Joe Cox murder was that this was one madman with a fixation. And there's very little you can do about that. But that type of person is unlikely to be in a group that bursts in to disrupt an event. So I feel very safe at the events that I do.
Jacob is right about one thing, that the man that murdered Joe Cox was a loner, and it is difficult to prevent against that. However, Jacob, much as I love Jacob and I admire Jacob and I think he's terrific, I think he's being extremely naive in what he's just said. These groups are organised. They come under a variety of names. Generally, the names of the organisations are all about love and hope and being wonderful and fighting fascism and extremism. They are the hard left of British politics. They are totally and utterly out of control. And as for Mrs May saying she's going to create new legislation, we don't need new legislation. We've already got legislation when it comes to assault and all these things, and indeed several people have been convicted of assault against me, albeit, it's a slap on the wrist and a very, very small fine. But if you think about what happened there, if you think about universities increasingly beginning to know platform people, I'm asking you, do you think open democratic debate in this country is under threat? Because I do. We've reached a point where those on the left don't just disagree with those on the right. They don't think people on the right should even be entitled to hold those views, and certainly not to express those views in public. It is a very disturbing, very, very worrying development. I did speak at a university on Friday, and I'll tell you more about that, but generally, even I have reached the point where I've stopped accepting invitations to universities. Why? Because the security I would need to do it is just so expensive, unless, of course, the local police force wants to get involved. And I'm beginning to think that for open democratic debate to take place in this country, we are going to need the police, actually, to be there at nearly all public events. And I'm sad to say that, but I think that is where we've got to. As it turned out, the young man that really pushed Jacob hard has been identified, and guess what? He's a member of Momentum. He's a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. Where is the Labour leader this morning condemning people that behave like this? Where are you, Jeremy? 0345 60 60 973. Mr Corbyn can call. Any of you can comment. Is free speech and the open democratic process under threat? Shanjan is calling from Bradford. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel.
Good morning. So, what do you think?
I think we are now reaching a point where basically anybody who holds socially conservative views cannot live a proper normal life anymore. That's what I've seen with myself.
And so how conservative are your views then?
I'm very socially conservative. I'm very young. I'm only about 25, but I have to say that it's had a big toll on my life because of my views. I don't feel sometimes that I can go to certain places on my own. I've had to be detained under mental health legislation 2 times in the last few years for expressing these views. I believe that what we're seeing now is fear and intimidation. I don't even invite people to where I live because I fear that things could really get out of control.
And who are the people? Who are the people, Shanjan, that have threatened you or jostled you?
I haven't been threatened or jostled, but I've often found, if I say, I'm going to vote conservative, that people, they get very angry, they get very defensive with you, then they start asking you questions, they try to pressure you into saying, why are you this way? And, they try to make you feel guilty for your beliefs.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing happening. I think there are quite a lot of, when you hear all this stuff about, conservatism is dying, this, that, I don't think it is. I think what's happening is there's a lot of people out there who are very conservative, but they don't.
They're scared to. You're right. The shy Conservative in the opinion polls, the shy UKIPper in the past in the opinion polls, people are scared to say what they really think. Shanjan, it's a perfectly valid point. On Twitter, I agree with Farage on one thing. The left are out of control. Boy, they are out of control. Nigel, your debating goes like this. You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. Your double standards are breathtaking. Johnny, there's a big difference between humour and saying that somebody was a scruffy so-and-so, which, by the way, given his salary, he really was, and given that he has zero personality, that kind of thing gets chucked around in parliaments. It's called free, open debate. You want to hear what they call me, even in the European Parliament? Please, get some balance. John is calling from Formby. John, is open democracy under threat?
Oh, absolutely, and this is Mr Corbyn's new gentler politics. I think we're going back to the 1930s, where the Nazis and the communists used these sort of tactics to silence the opposition. And I think what needs to happen is we do need this new law to stop people preventing debate behaving in this yobbish manner. And I would go a bit further. I think it's got to cover places such as theatres and abortion clinics where people can be harassed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not disputing people have the right to protest. And the great lefty mantra, of course, is we have the right to challenge your views. But private citizens, we have the right not to be harassed.
Yes.
And if I don't want to talk to them, I want to walk on.
I mean, there's a slight difference here, John, as you say, between a private citizen. But I mean, look, I have done more public meetings around this country than any other politician in this country. John, I always want there to be opposition in the room. I want people to boo and jeer a bit. I want people to ask questions. I want to have that public debate. Do you know what, John? I love it. I love it. And I had this at Trinity College University in Dublin on Friday. But what I've had to face in the last few years, John, is not that. It's people not only physically trying to attack me, intimidating members of the public as they go into these meetings, and many of them actually turn around and go home again. John, you talk about the need for a new law. I wonder what we're doing with existing laws. I'm going to let you go, John, but I will in a moment tell you about the campaign of violence that was conducted against me and what Theresa May did to help me in that circumstance. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:15. Intimidation and violence at public meetings, the attempt to shut down and prevent debate. There is too much of it going on in this country at the moment. We saw what happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg the other day. I mentioned to you what happened to me at the end of 2012 in Scotland, where about 80 young protesters making very, very extreme threats, and the police hiked me out of there and parked me in a pub for my safety. But joking aside, I realised after that this was getting very, very difficult, and that things were going to get very nasty, and that some of these left-leaning organisations, all, as I've said before, with names about love and hope and being anti-fascism, but in fact, in many ways, they're actually the complete opposite. I realised then that I just simply couldn't go on with a list of public engagements without help and support, so I got security. I guess the one in a way that scared me the most was I'd just had major reconstructive neck surgery in 2013. Literally a few weeks after I'd had that surgery, and I was being taken into a hotel for a meeting, and I did have people with me, but one of the protesters hit me over the head with a wooden banner. That was very, very scary. And it went on from there, and it got worse, of course. My whole family was attacked. There were 60 or 70 of them that attacked the family on a Sunday in a pub. The children ran, terrified, and hid in the churchyard. When we got into the car, they climbed over the car. They smashed the car up. They wrote the car off whilst we were sitting in it. And after that, and, people saying we need new laws. After that, what did the police do? Not a single prosecution. Not one person. They could have been prosecuted for criminal damage, intimidation, and worse. Not a single prosecution. But we got to the point where just living daily life was becoming very dangerous and very difficult. So I wrote to Theresa May, because she was the Home Secretary. And we got the forms, and we filled the forms in, we put an accompanying letter, we outlined the incidents of violence, and explained that with a full series of public events that I was doing, all of which were pre-advertised. Could we please have some help of some kind? And guess what? We got back from Theresa May. A letter saying no. She wouldn't help me in any way at all. And yet, when it happens to one of her own MPs, suddenly it's all a little bit different. Now we're going to bring in a new law. So I wasn't particularly impressed by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary on this issue. And I suppose it's true to say I've not been very impressed by anything else she's done ever since. So I feel there are laws in place and that more needs to be done. In the other cases, the guy that hit me over the head with the stave, a guy that bashed me over the head with an egg, I did prosecute in all those cases, but, it's a sort of 60 quid fine and a slap on the wrist. Doesn't really mean very much at all. But something has to be done. Robert says, well said, Nigel, we have laws in place that are not being acted on. And, Robert, that is how I feel about this. James is calling from Manchester. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. Can you hear me okay?
Very clearly.
Yeah. First of all, I welcome any new laws that can help prevent this, what appears to be sort of violence going on with what's supposed to be in this country free speech. But I'd much more welcome if Theresa May was to appoint in every university in the country some kind of brand new communications director which swears an oath of impartiality, just like the police do. I'm afraid that, well, can I just say, Nigel, I'm afraid that a lot of this goes a lot deeper. A lot of this type of behaviour from this individual, which is plastered, by the way, all over the newspapers today, a lot of this is perpetuated by right from the Vice-Chancellor down in these universities, right down to lecturers, even though they pretend it's not going on. And it's they're actually actively supported.
James, there is no impartiality in British universities, I'm sorry. 21 Vice-Chancellors, without virtually referring to their boards, wrote a letter to the Times in the referendum, openly backing the Remain side in the referendum. You've got our universities, James. There are scores of Monet professors in our universities. So certainly on the issue of European Union and anything associated with that, such as free movement of people, there is no impartiality in our universities. That's what I contend.
No, Nigel, you've just taken exactly my point. I don't know if I explained it correctly enough. That's exactly what I was saying. There is no impartiality. And what's happened, that's why I said that the left wing is being perpetuated by the vice-chancellors of these new universities all the way down to lecturers. And they are brainwashing our children. And can I say, Nigel, I looked at this point the other day. All these people that are going to what I now laughingly call universities, I call them glorified daycare centres, and I'm very fearful that the people are going through them here and now, because you only need to look in any of the newspapers for job adverts, and I'm talking about really, really high job adverts that are advertised in the press for anything from software writers to director of sales, right? They all come with the same mantra at the bottom, printed in big black bold letters, graduates need not apply. The top jobs are sick of these people that are coming out of university.
Yeah, I mean, that's a slightly separate debate, James, but I do understand what you're saying. James, just quickly, one last question to you. Do you think in her big speech on Tuesday the Prime Minister will address this issue of lack of impartiality at universities?
I think, sadly, Nigel, because I support you everything, 100% of the way, I sadly think she's going to give us some more lame duck excuse. And I'll tell you what I also fear with this, is that she might actually turn it, Theresa Turncoat, into something where there's actually no free speech for people like you and I.
Gosh.
And that's my greatest
fear. James, you're even more sceptical about the Prime Minister than I am. Thank you for your call. Mark says, once upon a time, we could have a discussion without people judging one another, trying to force their opinion on the other person. This is not about law, it's about changing attitudes and a basic lack of common decency. Mark, I think there's a lot of truth in that. One thing, and I hope people will credit me with this, I've been with LBC now just over a year, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evening, Sunday mornings, and we have people in the studio like Alistair Campbell or Vince Cable, people with completely different political views to me, and we get it from the callers. And I hope what I've tried to do is to show that we can have a proper debate on the different sides of what are often very strong, emotive arguments, and at the same time show respect for each other. And I try and do that with the callers, unless they're rude. And then perhaps sometimes I take a slightly different view. Cameron is calling from Taunton in Somerset. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, do we have a problem? Am I right in saying that the left are out of control?
Absolutely. I tell you, I voted Brexit.
Yep.
Okay, and it was one of the few. I vote in every election because I believe democracy is the way you change, and I believe it should be law to vote. Everybody should vote by law. And it was the only election or vote that I've really been passionate about in. And my politics is straight down the middle, and I voted for Brexit because of sovereignty. Nothing to do with immigration or any of those rules, it's sovereignty. And I feel now that very much that my views, I feel like I'm being called a Nazi or a racist.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Because I have these, I suppose I tend to slightly to the right, if I'm honest.
So, Cameron, tell me, living in Taunton, do you go to the pub or the local rugby club, or where do you go and socialise?
Well, down the local pub.
Right, and are you comfortable in modern Britain expressing your views in the pub, or do you sort of bite your lip a little bit in case someone thinks badly of you?
I tend not to say too much. I mean, I say my views are, let's say, straight down, pretty much down the middle, slightly to the right. But I tend not to say too much because you feel very much like, I feel like I'm being called a Nazi or a racist because I'm not. I mean, the Shadow Chancellor, I believe, or the Foreign Secretary, said that he wanted to challenge every Conservative view face to face. I can't remember the gentleman's name. That's how irrelevant he is.
Was this John McDonnell?
I honestly can't remember. Yeah, it might have been. And in my mind, that's a threat.
Well, Cameron, he actually made a joke, and he repeated a joke about Esther McVeigh, a Conservative member of Parliament, being lynched.
Yeah, I mean, that's just not on. It's, and they kind of need to be brought to heel. And you're going on about laws, do we need new laws? We don't need new laws. We have the laws. The gentleman that assaulted you, it's a common assault.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And there need to be much tougher sentences for that, in my opinion. I really think so. Is there a moment, Cameron, at which you think this sort of got worse?
I think, to be honest, it started with Brexit.
Yep.
Because I think the Liberal elite all threw their toys out the pram because it wasn't going the way they wanted.
Well, you may be right, but I saw it years before Brexit, Cameron. I saw this years and years before Brexit. I saw this emergence, and I tried to warn people about it, but they just said I was whinging. But when it happens to one of their own, they take a very different view, don't they? Thank you, Cameron, for your call from Taunton. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 10:30. I'm asking this morning whether the attack on Jacob Rees-Mogg is part of a bigger trend. My view is the left are out of control. They're trying to close down democratic debate, and we need to do something about it. But, big story today, one that I think is pretty worrying, is the speculation that the government could axe 2 specialist ships used by the Royal Marines. If it happened, a further 2,000 Royal Marines would be cut, and they're a corps that have been reduced quite substantially over the course of the last few years. In fact, ever since David Cameron became Prime Minister, it seems to me, we have been cutting our conventional forces in a very, very big way. There are some, of course, that say it doesn't matter, because war now is all going to be cyber war. Not sure I agree with that. I wonder what our next guest will make of that, because our next guest is Dr. Chris Parry, former Rear Admiral and former commander of the UK's amphibious group. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, and can I start by saying well done on your decisive role in getting us to leave the European Union.
Well, that's very sweet of you, Rear Admiral. Thank you. It really is. But that aside, so Chris, I take what some would think to be a rather old-fashioned conventional view. I think we need to have strong forces. I don't see without amphibious groups how we could even help or attempt to defend Britain's dominions around the world. But there are some, Chris, that will say, look, it doesn't matter because warfare has changed. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'd respond by saying, how long have you got? In general terms, the world is more dangerous. We need to have hard-edged warfighting capabilities. And this debate about the amphibious ships and the Marines is a very complex one. There is no doubt that we need to retain every single Royal Marine that we have. They are our best high-quality, elite assault forces. There's nothing like them in the world today. As for the 2 ships, I would say that if you're old-fashioned, yes, these are the ships for you. There's all this sort of stress on getting the troops across the beach. Very few objectives are actually on the beach nowadays. Yeah. And with modern technology like ballistic missiles, unmanned aircraft, it's fundamentally dangerous to put these ships in harm's way. In fact, I would say, as an ex-amphibious commander, they are incapable of going in harm's way in their current configuration. The landing craft themselves, they only go about 10 miles an hour, and I'm afraid in modern warfare, they're not agile enough, and the ships themselves are probably obsolete.
So there's an argument here, then, for modernisation within the Royal Marines, but not, in your view, for cutting numbers?
certainly not cutting numbers. They are the best, as I say, assault troops we've got. We've got other ways of getting them ashore to their targets and objectives. And I'm afraid quite a lot of the thinking, especially in the House Commons Defence Committee at the moment, is very old-fashioned. That's very interesting. And Chris, someone said to me that actually the Royal Marines make up about 40% of what we term special forces. Yeah, a lot of the recruits for the SBS and the SAS, of course, come from the Royal Marines. They also have a support function in actually shaping what we call the battle space for the other special forces to operate. But I think the key point is that, and what the government needs to understand is we're up against very serious opponents now. The likes of Russia and China are procuring very high-end missile and other capabilities. And frankly, we've been benchmarked against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State for the last 15 years. That's not good enough. No. And Chris, a broader point. You know, since 2010, we have had cut after cut in manpower. The British Army is now down below 80,000. Do you think that it's become very difficult for those that want to defend our armed forces to get a proper hearing in Westminster? I think they get a proper hearing. I don't think they get a proper say. They're not allowed to say. It's only people like me who are past being retaliated against who can actually speak about these things. The fact of life is the government is putting more and more money into defence. They're getting less and less output out of it. And that's because they don't have a proper strategic concept for the future. And I'm afraid in electoral politics, people are focused on the next election, not in 15, 20 years' time when the strategic environment is different. OK, so message to the Prime Minister, please. Message to the Prime Minister is you are pushing global Britain at the moment. If you want to be a big participant and you want to trade across the world, you have to invest in global capabilities. That means primarily your Navy and your Air Force, and it's very unusual to have a large standing army in peacetime. Chris Parry, thank you very much indeed. And what a big insight there, folks. Wasn't it interesting to get the former commander of the amphibious group, actually, in his view, these two vessels, HMS Albion and Bulwark, and he's saying the equipment we've got for amphibious landings is in fact hopelessly out of date. Cutting those, he says, is not a great problem, not something to start tearing a hair out over. What he is worried about is another massive slash to the size of the Royal Marines. Really, really interesting. OK, back to our debate, back to are the left out of control and what needs to be done. The extreme left are out of control. They have achieved nothing in decades and have no genuine arguments. Calling a current politician a racist, fascist and Nazi is not making any political point. No, and that is what they do all the time. That is the terminology. That is the language. And Jacob said he wanted to engage them in intellectual debate. They don't want to engage in debate of any kind at all. They want to close debate down, which is why we have to do a lot more than we're doing. Whether the Prime Minister is right in terms of putting forward new legislation, or whether we just enforce what we've got, I'll leave up to you. Tom is calling from Chipping Sodbury in Bristol. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Now, do I understand that you're coming on under an assumed name, is that right?
That's right, sir. That's correct, yes.
OK, tell us your story, please.
Well, let me give you a bit of background, OK? I classify myself as a British citizen, OK? I've served this country. My father served this country. His brother served this country. And their father, my grandfather, served this country through 2 World Wars and the Cold War. On Friday night, I was invited by my son to go and listen to Mr. Rees-Mogg and what he had to say.
Yes.
Now, my son is in Bristol. He is studying politics as part of his education. He knows what he wants to do, and he needs to get certain qualifications to do it. So, as part of his obviously stuff he needs to do, he needs to, speak to politicians and, work out, I don't know, about politics, really. I don't really bother with it, but, I was quite happy to go along, spend some time with my son.
And did you go along, Tom, because you were curious about Rees-Mogg, this sort of emerging personality?
Well, my son has told me about Rees-Mogg and what he's saying, and it sort of resonates with how I feel.
Okay, yeah.
And so I went along with my son, and we waited and Mr. Mogg came out. And I have to tell you now, Mr. Farage, there was absolutely no security. There was no bodyguards. There was nothing, okay? Absolutely nothing. And Mr. Rees-Mogg came in. There was a bit of a round of applause for him. and the next thing there was a loud bang, and a bit of confusion, a lot of noise, and I wondered what was happening, and ended up looked round, and the back doors had been bust in, and there was a gang of probably about half a dozen or more masked men shouting and hurling abuse. Okay? Now, from my perspective, Mr. Farage, the last time I seen masked men, they were trying to kill me back in Belfast, right?
Yeah.
So I was incensed by this. This went on for 5 or 10 minutes, and I looked back to the front to see what Mr. Mogg was doing, and to my amazement, he was walking up towards them. Now, to me, that was madness.
Well, it shows does show a certain courage, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, he's quintessentially British with stiff upper lip and that, isn't he? That is how he is. When I seen him going up there, I thought, this is mad. What's he going up to this? They're obviously hostile. So he went up, started talking to him, and it was an obvious a waste of time. They were just hurling abuse, filthy language. Yeah. I didn't go out on a Friday night with my son to have to listen to that abuse.
And how intimidatory, Tom, were they? I mean, I saw sort of videos of pushing and shoving, and perhaps the odd punch being thrown.
No, there was no. Look, there was no. The only punch that came was from the guy who was getting in Mr. Mogg's face. I went up there because I was actually worried about his security. Yep. Like I said, there was no security whatsoever, and nobody seemed to be doing anything. And these guys were just having the free rein. And this is a country that we're all anti-bullying and all this. They'll have to stop bullying, and bullying's terrible. These men were absolutely bullying this man. Not only were they bullying, they were totally offensive. And so when I went up, it sort of, some of the guys had sort of stood back, but this one guy in particular wasn't having it, and he was getting even closer to the point where he was well within Rees-Mogg's personal space. And at that point, I thought, no, I have to do something. All I decided to do was try and get him a safe distance away from Mr. Mogg so that he couldn't hurt him, or he couldn't. I was worried about maybe him pulling out a knife and stabbing him or something, because afterwards it's too late, and then you wish you had done something, and I thought, I have to do something.
Well, well done you for doing it. And how long was it, Tom, before security or police arrived?
Oh, it took forever.
Did it?
Yeah,
so it was a pretty uncomfortable standoff.
I'm really unhappy about it. I went there with my son to spend an evening with my son.
Yeah.
To find out about what this man had to say.
And to engage in a democratic process.
Democracy, sir, that's what I'm about, democracy. I'm not Conservative, I'm not Labour, I'm not Lib Dem.
No.
I would be what we would call a floating voter, and I would vote for whoever I think is doing the right thing. And clearly these people, the party that they follow, is not doing the right thing.
And do you feel, because I've been through this myself, these kind of confrontations, do you feel, I mean, the object presumably was to stop Mogg from speaking?
Well, I don't even know if it was that. How I see it is, there are young people, obviously, from what I can gather, college students, so they're obviously educated. Why would a young person on a Friday night who has clearly got intelligence spend their time planning to go and abuse people? Why can't they go to a concert or go and have a meal or go and have an intellectual conversation?
Because Tom, something's gone wrong. Something has gone very badly wrong, and we now have a group of young people on the left who don't think those who have a different point of view should be entitled to hold it or express it, and it's horrid. Well, Tom, well done for what you did and for coming on and giving us that testimony. And just lastly, can I ask you, do you think on balance that Jacob Rees-Mogg had a lucky escape?
I worry for his safety.
Yeah, well, do you know what? I do too. He's going to need support. He's going to need looking after. Tom, thank you very much indeed for that. And I hope that the state provides some help for somebody as high profile as Jacob Rees-Mogg. Theresa May provided me with no help at all. And the only way I was able to continue over the course of those next 3 years, I had to raise hundreds of thousands of pounds from private donations to keep me out on the campaign and to keep me safe. If that money hadn't been there, I couldn't have even fought the Brexit campaign. And surely, for the democratic process to work, people in high-profile positions need to be supported. I believe that very, very strongly indeed. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 10:47.
This is LBC.
Well, before the break, you heard that amazing account from Tom, a pseudonym of somebody who was there in the room and who himself formed a human shield between Jacob and the protesters. It does sound like the whole thing was deeply, deeply unpleasant and perhaps actually potentially pretty dangerous. Jacob has said, no, it's fine, there's no problem, but I think what happened to Jacob is going to fundamentally change his life. It certainly did when it happened to me a handful of years ago. So the left, I think, are totally out of control. I feel open democratic debate is under threat, and I can see from the sheer number of phone calls and messages coming in that this subject is exciting. Great debate. Dave is on from Doncaster. Somebody else who's coming on, not using his own name.
Yeah, hi Nigel. Thanks for taking the call. I think I can contribute as to why, or certainly why I think that this is happening.
Yes.
I'm a teacher, and I have the benefit, I think, of having spent 23 years in a different industry, not dissimilar to your game, funnily enough, in the city.
Okay.
Before I became a teacher, and it hits you how political and politicised the schools are. And as you go along in your learning, you do your course, your graduate studies, you start to realise that primary, secondary, and tertiary education is I would say 80% of the left, but it could be more. No one will ever say in a teacher's common room they vote Conservative. It took me a year before I was able to say to people that I voted Leave, and even though they got to know me and we got on, we were friends, I was called a racist and all the rest.
Were
of it.
you?
Yes.
What? Because you voted Leave?
Yes, xenophobe, all the normal names.
Oh, I know them well.
I'm sure. But it was incredible because I'm half Caribbean. This is, you are entering some sort of twilight zone when you get into the detail of what's going on in this country. But I think I know what's happening. There's a conditioning in the primary, the secondary, and it's not just necessary. It's not just teachers saying Conservatives are bad and Labour good. It's in the agenda, it's in the curriculum, it's what the kids are being taught, it's the history that's being omitted. These kids do not know. They don't know who Stalin is. They just don't know who Pol Pot is. They don't know they don't know the roots to the word Nazi, where it comes from. There's a whole chunk of our history's been erased in modern Europe, and there's a conditioning that takes place such that when they get to university or they leave university, trigger words, they're like Pavlovian dogs. There's certain triggers like nation state, or if you use the word personal or the words personal responsibility, that gets these kids really up. And I think that we're failing our children because we're not giving them the tools to be able to think for themselves.
Well, do you know, Dave, everything you've just said feeds into my big theory on this, which I was holding back, but I'm going to use it now that you've made the points you have. I think we've stopped teaching people critical thinking. We've stopped teaching people, here is a particular problem, and here are two particular approaches in terms of dealing with it. And they're both respectable, and it's up to you to make your own minds up. Because what I saw, Dave, with my children going through school is on a whole host of issues, whether it's global warming or whatever it may be, they're being taught this is right, this is fact, this is the solution to the problem, and anybody that thinks anything different is an extremist, a denier, or whatever other word they choose. I don't think, Dave, we're teaching critical thinking.
I totally agree. My original degree was philosophy, I did a joint philosophy and mathematics, and the reason I came into the teaching is because it was always in the back of my mind at some point, but I came into teaching because I wanted to impart the ability to create arguments and do exactly what you just described. But when I look at what is being taught, and I look at the fact that we are falling behind more and more in mathematics, the cynic thinks it's deliberate. Our leaders, certainly, our political leaders, there's no science background really in Parliament, so we end up making some terrible decisions economically. But I am fearful, Nigel, because if this carries on, if we keep having a country where people can't speak freely, Theresa May, look, her thing where she wants to introduce this new law, we don't need new laws, just enforce the laws. She's doing this politically.
Yeah, I agree.
She's afraid of Rees-Mogg. She's afraid of Rees-Mogg.
And do you know what, Dave? So she should be.
Well, he's going to be the next Prime Minister.
Well, he may be. I mean, the Sunday Times say it's going to be Boris today as part of a big plot, but certainly his popularity has soared, hasn't it, over the course of the last few months?
It absolutely has. But look, the Conservative Party, although he hasn't been in cabinet and all the rest of it, they do have a history of the long shot, the outsider coming in. Margaret Thatcher was an outsider. I know she had some experience before, but I can see it happening. We're in such volatile times. When the markets are volatile, some very improbable outcomes do come about sometimes.
Yeah.
And I can see it because he's just liked. And,
liked by some, but not by the hard left. Dave, listen, I want to say thank you for coming on and explaining all of that. Great phone call. Just very quickly before you go, despite what you've seen, are you motivated to stay in teaching?
Nigel, I will not stay in teaching in England. I may go abroad Asia, where there's a respect for the teacher and the children want to learn, beckons, to be honest. I can't. You should do a show just on teaching, Nigel. I could give you some feedback and some pointers. It's a madhouse. It is utterly crazy what's going on in British education, and it's so badly managed. The waste of resources and the ideas, some of the stuff in the curriculum, Nigel, it's
and you can't
very, very,
and you feel intimidated such that you can't speak your mind without being abused.
Not physical abuse,
no.
But you will get comments and all the rest of it. Nigel, we're not creating the right people to create the tax base to pay for our public services.
Scary. Dave, thank you. Bit depressing, that phone call. If people like Dave are going to leave teaching in this country, hey, we have got a very, very real problem indeed. Mr. Mogg needs to realise you can't engage people in intellectual debate who have no intellect. I'm not sure whoever sent that text is right, because the point that Tom made, who was there at the meeting, is the protesters were students, people who've passed GCSE, people who've passed A-levels and are doing degree at university. It's just, I think as our teacher has just explained, that actually they're being taught there is one world view on all of these things, and they're beginning not just to accept that, but to actually hate people who have a different worldview, and I find all of that really scary. Look, I think we've had a really good run at this, and I think, frankly, this subject is so big that I'm going to continue it over into the next hour, because it does seem to me that if people are not allowed to go out democratically, to speak their minds, to engage the public in debate, if people like Tom can't go along with their son to listen to a public event because they're interested in what the speaker's got to say, something fundamentally is going wrong in this country. Is free speech under attack? I think it is. Let me know what you think by calling 0345 60 60 973, text to 84850, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. I've lived through what Jacob Rees-Mogg had happen to him on Friday evening. I had years of it, and I had to have very, very expensive security around me, which UKIP donors, thank you, paid for. If I hadn't had it, I could not have continued. I could not have done what I did in the European elections, the general election and the referendum. It would not have been possible, because these people would have physically assaulted me every single day. And even when they can't get close to me, I've had in pubs, people throwing pints of beer over me and all the rest of it. There is a new, deeply intolerant left, many of them linked to the Corbynista movement, others members of organisations fronting, who talk about being anti-fascist and all for peace and love and hope, and actually they behave completely and utterly differently. Is free speech genuinely under attack? And very interesting, we had that phone call there from a teacher in the north of England, basically saying that his view is that our young people are being taught one particular worldview, and it goes all the way on through school and into university, and they believe that one worldview is right, and that others who have a different view are somehow very bad, nasty people. Indeed, all the names that Jacob Rees-Mogg was being called on Friday evening. Totally agree with Dave. I'm a teacher too. My daughter used to like reading the Daily Mail. A few weeks in the sixth form, and she's a Corbynista. And of course, there's no violence from the far right all over Europe, Nigel, says John. Yes, there is violence on the right. Of course there is. And the Joe Cox murder was, the most shocking example of that. But what there isn't, John, there isn't a coordinated campaign on the right funded by multi-millionaire men that come from Central and Eastern Europe, whose name I won't mention, I can't afford the legal bills, and in fact in some cases these organisations have received government funding over the years. So you do have on the left some very, very well-funded organisations whose expressed desire is to prevent public meetings from even happening. I don't see any evidence that the right in this country, horrid though many of them are trying to do that to stop Labour Party meetings or whatever else it may be. And I very much hope they don't. We want open democratic debate. Jacob Rees-Mogg is almost unique in his calm presentation and reasoned thinking. He is never inflammatory and never hostile. If the left are prepared to intimidate him, no one is safe, says Michael. Yes, Michael, but he does have views. He does have views on gay marriage and abortion that some would think are out of date. Others, of course, would probably agree with him. Femi is calling me from Shoreditch. Good morning.
Hi, I'm in Bristol at the moment. Hi, how you doing?
Okay, hello, right. You're in Bristol. You weren't at this meeting on Friday, were you?
No. And the thing is, I strongly disagree with what happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, I do believe that I do stand against everything that he stands for. I mean, as you just mentioned, his views on whether gay people should have the same rights as the rest of us, his views on whether women should be able to control their bodies, and what he said about Brexit, because Dyson, a multinational company, is going to be okay. He thinks that everyone else who suffers from Brexit, it's their own fault for not managing their businesses correctly. So he clearly doesn't care about normal people. But
well, actually, Femi, one thing he would say is one of the big benefits of Brexit is we can lower food prices, which would make a hell of a difference to people on low income. So, he does make that argument too, Femi.
As far as prices lowering, no. The whole point of the single market is that you can trade on the same legislative terms,
yes,
and therefore food coming from Europe will be significantly more expensive.
It's a different debate. The fact is, food from the rest of the world is massively more expensive because of a single market. But I tell you what, when we do a debate on food prices, you ring in. But carry on with your point, please, on this one.
While I do disagree with everything he stands for, I believe in that particular circumstance, he was the one in the right, as in he wasn't the one being aggressive. That was a place for political debate, and the people that came into that auditorium, they weren't engaging in political debate. So in that particular circumstance, he was actually the one who actually acted like a human being, whereas they weren't. Now, my main point about has the political discourse become toxic and unbearable in this country? One of the problems, one of the most painful results of Brexit is what it's done to families. I mean, my parents are, they're both doctors, so what you would call educated people. And up until a fair few months before the Brexit referendum, they didn't know which way to go. My dad was actually pro-Brexit. My mum was on the fence. So this argument that people who vote Brexit aren't educated, that's ridiculous. But the thing is, not everybody studied EU law, the main subject matter of Brexit.
But Femi, what we're discussing here, I mean, if you've got different views to your parents, right? Your parents voted Leave and you voted Remain, and you have different views to Jacob Rees-Mogg, and clearly you will have fundamentally different views to me. But you're on the radio now, Femi, and you've spoken to me before on this show. You're on the radio, we're having a civilised conversation. What is it about some that have your point of view that has led them to resort to intimidation, violence, abuse and thuggery?
Sorry, I just want to correct some things. One, my parents didn't vote Leave. They voted Remain. Why? Because they listened to somebody who did actually study EU law, and most importantly, and this is the point...
that's the referendum debate. I'm asking you, Femi, why do people from your set of views, why are now an increasing number of them attempting to shut down debate with those who have opposing views?
This notion that that's left trying to shut down, put those opposing views, completely negates the fact that anyone who tries to speak against Brexit is called a saboteur. They try, and they've been trying to silence us for months. But please, let me finish the point. This isn't about the referendum debate. This is about simply has political debate become untenable between families. And the point is, Brexit is going to affect the youth more. That's why my parents voted in favour of the generation that will have to deal with Brexit, and that's why parents within families, they have to decide, all right, I have these views, which they are fully entitled to, that they don't like the EU. but they know that their kids, the futures that they want to choose for themselves involve being in the EU. So they have a choice between, do I stick with my views or do I respect the views of my children? And that's why political discourse has become a lot more fraught. It's why it hurts so deeply.
I would take the opposite view, Femi. Why on earth would I want to condemn the young generation to be stuck inside a failing Europe? Anyway, slightly separate debate. Interesting, though, nonetheless. Jan says on Facebook, most of these excuses of human beings have never been taught the meaning of the word no. They are a dangerous force. Jan, they are a dangerous force. And as I say, not just speakers they attack, my audiences they used to abuse and attack as they were coming in through the doors. And very often, people would just see from 100 paces what was going on, turn round and go home again. It's not right. Johnny is calling from Exeter. Good morning, Johnny.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you today?
Fine, thank you. But I suppose in one way, Johnny, because I had years of this, I'm pleased at last there's actually debate about it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point that I was going to make. I think that the fact that we're having this debate today is a good sign. I think it's a sign that we are in many ways in a better place than we were a few years ago. For example, you wouldn't have been on the radio some time ago. You know this very well.
No, I think that's true.
UKIP was perceived as, an extension of the National Front or BNP way back before people really knew much about it. And I think you did a lot to move that perception on. And I think it's great, by the way, that you are on the radio and your voice and what you represent is being heard. And I think that's part of the problem of what we're debating today, because the fact that your voice and what you represent, I use those words rather than characterise it as, something of a political label, is bigger and it's being heard. And that's the trouble, that the pendulum is swinging the other way slightly, temporarily, and I think it just keeps swinging, and we must keep it swinging. We must keep talking. We must keep all views on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johnny, I've always been happy for people with completely different views to come to my meetings and to engage, in proper open debate. Just as I am, Johnny, on this show. Very happy to hear a different point of view, but to do it in an atmosphere of a civilised conversation. As I say, whether it's Sir Vince Cable or Alistair Campbell, we're able to have a proper democratic debate. But it is this shouting down, this thuggery and this violence which worries me. Johnny, I think your point actually is a good one, though, that actually the centre of gravity of these debates has shifted, hasn't it?
Yes, I believe it has. And, I, by the way, I am concerned with the way that the left is attempting to shut down debate. I'm certainly, I can't be pigeonholed or characterised in any sort of traditional way politically. Some of my views, you have to ask me on a particular issue what I think. And then you might be able to say, oh, that's leftist, or, that's more sort of right-wing. But, I am concerned, and I'm concerned with anyone that tries, that holds an ideology that involves shutting down free speech.
Yes, sir, Mike. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, Johnny, listen, great call. You're absolutely right. But the very fact that we are beginning to talk about these things maybe shows we are, in some ways, beginning to win. Gina Miller has to hire security due to death threats, which you conveniently failed to mention, says Joe. Joe, death threats? She's only had a handful. I've had dozens of them. I mean, no, literally, dozens of them. I'm going to say, Joe, anyone that pops their head over the parapet into public discourse, particularly given we have social media, is going to get abuse. Because in the old days, they had to write the poison pen letter. When I first started in politics, I used to get those. The Green Ink Brigade. I don't get any more of those anymore. It's sad, really. I used to quite laugh and enjoy them. But now, of course, because of social media, people can threaten and abuse you directly and very, very quickly. And it's happened to Diana, but it's happened to lots of people in public life. There aren't many people that have to hire security, but once someone reaches a certain profile, I'm afraid they do. And I don't want to see people like Gina Miller receiving threats like that. And by the way, she's somebody else with a different point of view that I have invited onto this Sunday morning show, and she says, yes, at some point she'll do it. So we will have Gina Miller in the studio here within the next few months, and we'll prove that you can have a civilised debate with people that you are diametrically opposed to. Something that the new modern young left in Britain don't seem to even comprehend, greatly to the worry of many of us. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:15. Hard, young left militants want to use violence, thuggery, intimidation. They want to close down debate and stop public meetings being held by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and myself. And where we're getting to with this conversation is a large number of teachers ringing in, telling us there is a problem in the education system. And I've got another one on the line now. I've got Glyn from Romford. Good morning, Glyn.
Good morning. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I've been a member of the Conservative Party since age 18, and when I was at university, I was definitely in a minority there.
Yeah.
And I remember advocating the view back then, and I was laughed at and pilloried for such a weird idea. And since I've become a teacher, the same thing. I'm definitely in a tiny minority at work.
What?
And if you
can I ask, Glyn, what age you are?
I'm 31.
31. Okay, fine. So, are the universities, in your view, very much worse than they were 10 years ago?
When I was at university, we didn't have this safe space and no platforming, and there wasn't this sort. I mean, nowadays, I don't think I could survive at university. To be honest, I'd be chucked out.
Well, as a Brexit Tory, you'd be sort of tarred and feathered and lobbed over the wall of the premises or something.
No doubt.
But now you're in teaching, Glyn. Now you're in teaching. So how easy is it in the common room to talk about your Brexit views, your Conservative Party membership?
Well, what we do is there's a small band of us, and we sort of meet every now and again, and we sort of talk quite quietly, but we dare not do it openly.
This sounds like sort of Roman Catholics in Protestant England having to meet in secret.
I mean, there was a colleague of mine, and she is right wing leaver as well, and she dare not say UKIP's name. She told me that she voted, and then she didn't even say it. She wrote it down on a piece of paper to show it to me in case someone overheard in the staff room.
I mean, what would have happened to her? I mean, if she just said out loud, if she said, right, I'm coming out today, I'm UKIP, I mean, what would have happened to her?
Good question. To be honest, I don't know. And that's quite a good question. I don't know what the consequences would have been. But we had like a debate going on with pupils, and you had posters up for all different parties. And you had obviously Conservative Labour, you had Greens up, and you had UKIP up.
Yeah.
And a colleague of mine said, my God, okay, the extremists. And I said, well, what do you mean the Green Party?
Yeah, quite.
And she looks at me, so, yes, exactly. So the extreme of the left is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And that's actually endorsed.
Yeah. Mind you, Glyn, be fair, I was pretty extreme as UKIP leader, wasn't I? I mean, I believed in Parliament. I believed in parliamentary democracy. It's a very extreme view. I mean, that's what's so laughable, Glyn, about this, isn't it? What is so laughable about this is actually the views that I propagated, through my years, which I'm pleased to say are now accepted as being mainstream views in this country. But this attempt to label anyone you don't agree with as being a Nazi, I mean, it's ludicrous, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I've been called I've been called that in public. When I was campaigning in the general election, I had this woman from the SWP in Shepherd's Bush come up to me with a leaflet from the SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party.
Oh, yeah.
I smiled sweetly and said, no, thank you, I'm a Thatcherite. Or straight away, she turned into this shrieking banshee. She started hurling abuse at me in the middle of the street. Yes, and she called me a racist and a fascist and a bigot, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. But Glenn, tell me something. You're in teaching, you're sounding a bit disillusioned with it. Are you going to stick with it?
Oh, yes, I'm not going to be pushed out by the cultural Marxists. I'm sticking to it, no matter what. Yeah.
Good, Glyn, super, thank you. That was Glyn from Romford. I'm going to go to Melanie in Watford now. Good morning, Melanie.
Good morning, Nigel. I wanted to say that my daughter's studying and working within the NHS.
Yeah.
And on a day-to-day basis, she is horrified at the bullying and fierce views that the lefties and the Remains are putting forward. It's at a point where she would never dare say any views against Remain or anything like that, because it wouldn't be worth it. She would be verbally attacked. It's just horrendous, and so she just is clear of that. Even to the point of in the studies doing essays, she could have gone for political viewpoints, but she's steadfastly avoided something like that. And I would have advised her to do that because I think it would the tutors reading a viewpoint that wouldn't agree with them, it could count against her in her studies.
I wonder, Melanie, how far away we are from actually burning books in sort of high streets and things. I mean, this demonisation.
Paintings, aren't they?
Yes. Paintings are paintings. There was a painting removed from Manchester Gallery last week. There's talk of any film that Harvey Weinstein was involved with never being shown again. And I think we're not very far away from burning books. And that may sound outrageous and controversial, but I think that's where we're going, Melanie.
Medieval. Very
worrying. Very worrying. Melanie, thank you. So, there we are. We've had it from the National Health Service. It would appear that all our public services, all our public institutions, all have one world view. I must say, full credit to Tony Blair. He did a fantastic job. He really did. Peggy is calling from Basildon. Good morning, Peggy.
Good morning, Nigel. Keep up the good work. What really annoys me is you've got these students, so-called students, the great unwashed, masquerading as the working class. That's the danger.
Oh, they're not working class at all. In fact,
they've never done a day's work in their life. What do they know about the working class? But they're masquerading as that.
I had a lovely one in 2014. It was the week before the European elections. I was doing a big event in Westminster, and there were a group of very middle class, probably upper middle class youngsters, all no doubt, Peggy, with rich mummies and daddies, shouting at one of my candidates for the European elections, who was mixed race, and calling him a racist. I thought, you just couldn't make this stuff up, could you?
You couldn't. And going back to the schools, this has been going on for at least 40 years. You would never see the Daily Mail or any other paper, only the Guardian. It's been rife in schools for 40 years.
What do we do to fix it, Peggy?
Well, wake up, people. Listen to everybody's point of view. We've got to stand firm. We've got these fringe groups that are taking over. If we let them watch and listen, for goodness sake, what's the matter with the world? What is the matter with the British people? I don't know.
Well, I don't know, Peggy. I think ordinary, decent British people understand this and they want to live in a democratic, free society. Theresa May will give a speech on Tuesday. Maybe she'll offer some solutions. I don't know. Nigel, as a Conservative senior school teacher, my free speech is and always has been completely blocked. In my first week of teacher training 15 years ago, I was booed for asking a simple question in a lecture. I came out as a Tory a few years ago and I've now had to deactivate my Facebook and Twitter because of the shouty lefty abuse that I get. The latest prejudice is against those with any conservative view at all, and the educationalists are the culprits. It must end. Rebecca in Birmingham. Pretty clear from a lot of these phone calls, this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for a very, very long time. Going to go to Paul, who's calling from Devon. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm all right, but I want to get back to a situation where we can completely disagree with each other, but accept the other person has the right to have that view.
It's never going to happen. No,
all right.
I've had this for my own daughter.
Yeah.
Okay. We were discussing something, and the subject of immigration came up. Now, they are actually teaching this lefty view at school. Teachers can say what they like, deny it as long as they like, but they are teaching it. She was rattling on about, they had a right to come over here and everything and so on and so forth. I said, what about the other side of the coin then?
Yeah.
How do you mean? I said, OK, I've decided that I've had enough of living in the UK. It's rapidly circling the bowl and the hole is getting smaller and smaller, and I want out. So let's sell everything we own, spend an absolute fortune getting over to Sweden, and we'll roll up in some little village in Sweden, hold our hand out and say, we've got no money at all, I'd like a house and a job, please. What do you think they're going to say to us? Ta-ta, go back to England. Bye-bye. Now, why does that not apply both ways? She couldn't answer. They are so... I mean, how do they manage to cross a road without getting run over?
And how is your relationship with your daughter these days, Paul?
It's fine. We just disagree.
We just disagree? I know.
We disagree, but you can't hold a conversation with them about it because they don't have the answers.
No.
I even said to her, well, all right then, forget that. I said, let's look at what they operate in this country. You're unemployed, you haven't got a job, your mum and dad haven't got a job. You decide, right, fed up with living in Bristol, let's go down to Cornwall. Now, you arrive in Cornwall, and because you've got no relatives living in Cornwall, you're not going to get yourself on the housing list. And you're not going to get a house, and you're not going to get anything. So why does that rule not apply for other people?
Well, these are other big debates, and there is a generational divide, Paul. That's true. I had a caller. I was doing a fill-in for the late night just over a year ago, the 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift, and a bloke rang in. It was sort of first week of the year last year. He said, I had the family all round for Christmas, invited everybody, my parents and my brothers and sisters, and they brought their kids, and 3 of them had just done their first term at university. I said, I really tried my best to make it a really good family Christmas lunch. He said, by the end of the lunch, my 3 nieces were screaming at me, meat is murder, you're a homophobe, you're a racist, and you're almost verging on being a Nazi. Something is going on inside our educational system. We are not teaching people genuine critical thinking. We are not teaching people there are different opinions in the world, and they are equally as respectable as yours, whether you agree with them or not. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:30, and there's a new hard left out there shouting down free speech, shouting down and jostling, pushing Jacob Rees-Mogg. I've seen plenty of it, and I'm wondering, what on earth can we do to try and get back to proper open democratic debate? But hey, the Prime Minister will speak on Tuesday. She'll talk about the possibility of a new law coming in to stop people intimidating out of making public speeches. But before we get back to that, big story today in the Sunday Times saying there's a big plot afoot for Boris to take over with Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg, and they are going to take over the 3 top jobs in the Conservative Party. Other newspapers like The Telegraph have people like Bernard Jenkin basically saying that unless Theresa May gets a bit more like Margaret Thatcher, that he'll bring the whole temple crashing down. And really, I think what's happening is the Brexiteers are saying, enough's enough. We've taken an awfully long time. We've given a lot of concessions. And if we are going to stay fairly closely linked to the single market, which is the Philip Hammond point of view, then frankly, what was the point of voting Brexit? And how are we going to get Brexit voters to turn out at the next election? But I wonder, is this plot real, or is it just a good newspaper story? So to help me with this, who better to go to than somebody like John Rentoul, chief political commentator for The Independent. Good morning, John.
Hello, Nigel.
So, good newspaper story, or do you think it could be true?
Well, it depends on what you mean by true. I mean, politics is fascinating at the moment because, you lot, the sort of the hard Brexiteers.
You lot, right?
I'm very worried about Theresa and what she's up to, and what she might get up to. But there isn't. I mean, the problem that they have is that there's a majority in the House of Commons for a soft Brexit.
Yes.
But there's a majority in the Conservative Party for a hard Brexit. Now, which of those is it going to be? And which way is Theresa May going to go in the end? I mean, that's the tricky one. And, what are the other EU countries prepared to give her? I mean, are they prepared to give her a soft Brexit? Or do they think that we should be punished for leaving? I mean, that's the big question. It may be up to them rather than up to us to decide.
Well, I went to meet Monsieur Barnier, John, a few weeks ago, as you may have seen. And
I saw.
Yeah, and, and when I talked about, a rounded, grown-up trade deal, which meant they could go on selling us motor cars and wine and cheese and chocolate and whatever it may be, in return for which we would get a reasonable degree of access on financial markets for insurance and banking services. I mean, his answer was no.
Exactly, that's what I mean. I mean, it looks as if there are. I mean, the EU, certainly Germany and France, want a hard Brexit. If we're leaving, they say, then leave, get lost, and suffer the consequences. But there are other EU countries, the Netherlands and Hungary and so on, who don't like that, and Ireland in particular, who really want us to stay as close in as possible. So I mean, people keep on talking about how the government is split on Brexit, but the EU has its own divisions.
No, I agree with that.
To resolve them.
No, I agree with that. And of course, we face the problem that whatever deal is agreed by October, that's the current deadline, that, of course, that's got to be ratified through 27 other member state parliaments and through the European Parliament. So goodness knows what happens there. And our own Parliament. But it's our own Parliament that fascinates me. John, sort of looking ahead a bit and trying to guess. So Theresa May comes back with a deal that really isn't that good, because what Barney has insisted upon is that for us to have a fair degree of market access on financial services, we have to go on paying 8 billion sterling a year, for argument's sake. In the face of this, does the UK Parliament, what happens? Does she say, right, this legislation needs to go through? What do the Ken Clarks, the Anna Soubry's do if it came down to a vote of confidence? If Theresa May had to use a vote of confidence to get whatever deal she negotiates through Parliament, would there be a risk that towards the end of this year this government could fall over this?
I don't think so. I don't think. Maybe Kenneth Clarke and Anna Soubry.
Yeah.
They're the only two who actually consistently voted against the government on the withdrawal bill. They might prefer a Jeremy Corbyn government to a hard Brexit, but I don't think there are many Tory MPs like them, and that's really what this story in the Sunday Times is about. It's about Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who want to hold Theresa May to a hard Brexit. But my view on that is that a hard Brexit is what we're going to end up with anyway.
Yeah.
So the real problem is going to come from the Ken Clarks and the Anna Soubrys. But I think there's only two of them.
Right. Fine.
When push comes to shove, Nicky Morgan and the rest of them are not going to allow a Jeremy Corbyn government.
Well, if you're right, then Brexit of some kind will go through, however hard or soft or good or bad the deal is.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Nigel. I think that's what people voted for, and that is what Parliament is going to deliver. People may cavil at the edges and the detail, but what we will get is what the other countries will give us. And we've got to decide whether to accept that or not. And I think we'll accept it pretty much on any terms.
I very much hope in that you're right. And finally, you, of course, read a biography about Tony Blair, Prime Minister.
Indeed.
Would you consider doing one on Theresa May?
It's already been done by my excellent colleague, Rosa Prince.
Right.
Of the Daily Telegraph. What did she call it? She called it the sort of... the reluctant Prime Minister, but inscrutable Prime Minister, some word like that.
But the big drama's yet to come, surely.
Well, I wrote my biography of Tony Blair partly because I sort of agreed with him about politics. I'm a sort of Labour Party centrist. I don't feel the same towards Theresa May, so I think you've got to have some affinity as a biographer for your subject. Yeah,
no, I'm sure that's true, actually. And finally, John, does Theresa May stay as Prime Minister for the next 6 months?
For the next 6 months, yes.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think she's going to fight the next election.
Okay, terrific. John Rentoul, thank you for joining us there. And John thinks, actually, when push comes to shove, however good or bad the deal is, there is just about a majority in Parliament for Brexit to happen next year. I hope he is right. Back to the subject. Nigel, you cannot teach critical thinking in 140 characters. The youth of today are not able to handle more information. Well, yes, we certainly are moving into a Twitter world, a Facebook world, an online world, but surely the job of schools and universities is to make sure that our youngsters are exposed to both sides of any argument and told they're both respectable. It's up to them to make their own minds up. Doesn't seem, from the phone calls we're getting, that is what is actually happening. Assad is calling from Ilford. Good morning, Assad.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm just worried that we've got this emergence of these new student activists on the hard left, and frankly, it's quite worrying, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, but then where I disagree with you is your analysis, in terms of that it's a emergence. I think that it's always been there. There's always extremes on fringes of whatever political ideology you pick up. What is worrying at this is when we miscategorize these fringes. So, for example, just to give you an example, it would be unfair to say that right are murderer just because someone from the right went on to murder Joe Cox. And I think exactly like this, it's absolutely wrong to categorize left if some people from the left choose to be, as you described, thugs and stuff. I think that's,
The difference is sad. Sorry. No. I hear what you say, but there is a difference. That the madman, the mentally ill person that killed Joe Cox from the sort of National Socialist right was a loner, was a lone wolf, and as Jacob Rees-Mogg quite correctly said, it's difficult to deal with people like that. But the difference is that these on the left are being organised. They're being funded.
Yes, Nigel, okay, fair enough. But then if we move to United States, which again, if you're talking about the political ideology, I think it shouldn't be bound just with the country border. I think we're looking into how the left and the right extremes are growing. And then if you look at how Breitbart works, or let's say, for example, there was a support from KKK for Donald Trump, but doesn't mean that all the Donald Trump support belong to.
No.
So I think it's very important to always distinguish this, because that's...
Of course. Any political movement will have people who say they support it that embarrass it, and I agree with that. But Asad, let me just ask you this very quickly. Isn't perhaps a slight problem here that a very organised, hard-left mob who want to shout people down now have very considerable influence in the modern Labour Party?
I think, yes, it is, because it's not as... well, I would agree that it's not as dangerous for the right. A lot of people say that, they've been shut down in debate or anything, but I think it's more dangerous for the left, because their actual ideology and then their actual... or I wouldn't say actual, but I'm talking about the tolerant left.
Yeah.
They've been misrepresented by them. So I think that's, as being on the left, I think I feel frustrated because they don't represent my views.
Well, let me make it clear, Asad, and thank you for the point you've made, that we are not saying everybody on the left is full of hate and intolerance, because they're not. And these people may numerically be a minority, but it doesn't take that many people, does it, to actually disrupt democracy, free speech in this country and all of our great traditions that those that went before us did one hell of a lot to make sure that we enjoy today, or we should be able to enjoy today. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:46. How do we stop a small but very highly organised, it would appear to be funded, group of thugs on the hard left of British politics, shouting down the Rees-Moggs and me and others? How do we get back to having a proper society where we respect the fact that other people have different views? But before we go back to that, it's funny, just as, well, we call it football, generally, but the Americans call it soccer, just as soccer and the Premier League is booming now all over the USA, interestingly, American football has made a bit of a comeback here with, games being played at Wembley and, full houses happening. And we think about these sports, we think about the Premier League, the money the players are earning, the television rights and all the rest of it. Well, have a think about this. Tonight sees the 52nd Super Bowl. The Philadelphia Eagles are going to play the New England Patriots. It's expected Justin Timberlake will be there singing. And, of course, American football lasts for about 4 hours with full food breaks in the middle and everything else. Expected that about 120 million people in America will watch this tonight. But just have a little think about this. All through NBC's coverage of this, there'll be a lot of adverts. And those 30-second slots are being bought for over $7 million. Over $7 million for a 30-second slot for a programme that's going to go on for the best part of 5 hours. As I say, you think there's big money in the Premier League? Super Bowl is even bigger. And it starts tonight at 11:30 p.m. our time, for those that are interested and want to try and catch up with it. Nigel, I don't think the Brexiteers have the moral high ground I get. No, we're not claiming whether we're Brexiteers, whether we're social conservatives like Jacob Rees-Mogg, we're not claiming the high ground, but we should be able to hold public meetings at universities or wherever else it may be without being intimidated. That's what I think. I wonder what Becky from Birmingham thinks. Good morning, Becky.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. Go on.
I'm a bit of a sort of a hybrid, and I'm actually a vegan and I'm into animal rights, but I'm also what I would consider to be kind of a central right. I voted Brexit.
Yes.
Now, what concerns me is how politics overtakes absolutely every other area that you might believe in. So I used to go on a lot of animal rights marches. Now, the speeches at the beginning and the end would start off with the animal rights issue and what we were supposed to be there for. By the end of it, it was an absolute tirade against anybody that would be considered to be right-wing. That's not why I went there.
Yep.
And when we used to debate things, if somebody used to ask me my opinion, I was actually too frightened to say that I would vote Conservative or vote UKIP. I would just say, I don't want to get into a debate. That's not why I'm here. Now, I had one other friend who was right-wing within that community, and she was absolutely driven out because she made the mistake of saying what she voted.
She was driven out?
Now, absolutely driven out. She had abuse on Facebook, she had abuse on Twitter, and it seems to me that you cannot have a single debate these days with what I would consider the hard left.
Yes.
Not Labour voters.
No. And Becky, that distinction is very important. But why, Becky? I mean, you've been on marches with these people. Why are the hard left so nasty?
I can't answer that because I'm not in that psyche. But it seems to be a kind of a brainwashing that no other point of view could possibly be considered. Now, I have friends who are Labour supporters, and we manage to have good debates, and we almost kind of laugh at each other's views. One of them bought me a Margaret Thatcher mug for Christmas, for example. But with the kind of harder left, it's too frightening. Now, I've had a couple of friends who I would consider quite hard left. And if I've sent them an article from, say, the Daily Mail, which I think is quite interesting, on anything, they've said they will refuse to click on it, refuse to open it, because all it's doing is adding to the readership of the Daily Mail. Now, to me, it's absolutely absurd. I read both the Daily Mail and the Guardian, and I assume that the truth is somewhere in between.
Good for you. It's rather like in America, Becky. You need two televisions. You have to have CNN and Fox, and maybe somewhere in the middle, because they're both so partisan. Becky, listen, I thank you for that call. It's really interesting that, Becky's work with, and she's seen the politicisation of these issues, veganism, animal rights, in her case. Back to the John Rentoul interview. Nigel, I'm a Tory who voted Remain. If the Tory party go for a hard Brexit, I and many other Remain Tories will not be able to vote Tory, and they would not be elected, says Steve. Yes, Steve, equally, the point that Jacob Rees-Mogg and others make is that if the Tories are not seen to deliver a proper, clean Brexit, there'll be a lot of Brexit voters that won't vote Tory. Theresa May really is stuck in the middle of this one, and to survive, she's going to have to make a big decision. I've joked before. I've said the Cabinet should either all be Remainers or all be Leavers, and the current policy of trying to bring the two with her on this journey is proving, I think, to be pretty impossible. Right, the last call I'm going to take today on this subject of free speech, the hard left, Jacob Rees-Mogg and all, is Mark in Palmer's Green. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Nigel. I had a real 40 Towers moment at a family party when my auntie said to me as I was going in, whatever you do, don't mention Brexit.
I love it. So did you?
I did. I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it.
So are you like the embarrassing uncle in your family, Mark, because you're a Brexiteer?
A little bit. There's a lot of hard Remainers in my family. I mean, real hard Remainers. But
you make it sound like a medical condition. I mean, perhaps this is the problem. We're not respecting each other enough on both sides of this divide.
Could be, but I've got a little story. I'll be as quick as I can. Yeah. Now, I remember at the time of the EU referendum, I was out there campaigning for Vote Leave, obviously. I was knocking on doors, handing out leaflets, etc. Anyway, one day I was out on the street in my local area, and I had my UKIP badge on, my Vote Leave badge on, and I was wearing my Grassroots Out T-shirt, so I was a bit of a target. Anyway, I was handing out Vote Leave leaflets, and this fella came marching over and started shouting in my face that all Brexiteers, Tory supporters and UKIP supporters are all disgusting, vile racists. And I was trying to have a calm and sensible debate with him, and I asked him how he's wanting sensibly controlled immigration system, racist, but he just kept shouting. So I calmly said to him, I assume you are a member of the Labour Party, and he shouted, yes, I am. So I said, you have a racism issue in the Labour Party, don't you? And he shouted, no, we don't. So I said, oh, isn't feeling anti-Semitic. Isn't that racist then? And with that, he went absolutely blooming berserk. And I started preparing myself.
Well, I'm pleased, Mark, because you got your own back. I'm out of time. I love the story. And look, folks, we're not saying everybody in the Labour Party supports this, but there is a young, growing, organised mob on the left who despise people with different points of view. It is very anti-democratic and it's bad news. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. At 3 this afternoon, it's Alex Salmond. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel. We will make America great again.